The Navy serviceman is one of the first in the country to be diagnosed and treated for internet addiction involving Google Glass. Joining me to talk about the emerging diagnosis and treatment is my guest, Dr. Andrew Doan, Chief of Addictions and Resilience Research at Naval Medical Center San Diego, who is treating the patient. It's an online addiction. Welcome, Dr. Doan.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the American Psychiatric Association does not actually recognize in the current DSM, the Manual for Mental Health Issues, they don't recognize internet addiction. How do you define internet addiction then?
That's correct. But they have recognized internet gaming disorder and that they have now wanted more research in that area. With internet addiction, the way you define it is that if someone is so preoccupied with the internet that affects their daily function and becomes dysfunctional, that then becomes an addictive behavior.
So it interferes with their work or their daily living
Absolutely,
activities.
absolutely. And sleep deprivation, relationships, performance at work, school.
How did this diagnosis for this particular patient, how was that made? Because I understand he was also being treated for another addiction.
Yes, the service member was being treated for alcohol addiction in a 35-day residential treatment center. However, in that 35-day period, we take away all technology. And so he kept on tapping the side of his face when we asked him questions. And he shared with us that the craving for the Google Glass was greater than the craving for alcohol. And he felt argumentative, he felt frustration and anxiety when people asked him to be without his Google Glass.
Now, what was he consuming online, and would that make a difference as to deciding whether it's an addiction or not?
Well, not necessarily, because there's people who love to read news all the time, or maybe trade stocks during the day. So I'm forming a term called digital potency. So there's things that are less digital potent, like let's say email and PowerPoint and Excel spreadsheets, right? It's hard to abuse those things. But there are things like gaming and internet websites and images that people would like to look at all the time that are more pleasing and more neuroendocrine arousal.
Well, and this leads me to the next question, because a lot of us have gone down that internet rabbit hole where you just can't seem to let go of this particular thread. So what's the difference between an internet binge and an addiction?
That's a great question. So people wouldn't abuse anything unless it was pleasurable. But when people binge, it's because it is pleasurable. But when they binge, now it causes dysfunction in their relationships. Now grades are dropping, their work is suffering, they're not sleeping well, or they feel like they can't cut back. They're agitated and they're frustrated. Those are signs and symptoms of a dysfunctional behavior associated with that addictive problem.
How did you treat this particular case of internet addiction?
So with all addictions, it starts with first education. So educating the patient on the problem so that they can actually make life modifications, as well as just unplugging them from the device. So during the 35-day residential rehab, because they're being unplugged from that addictive behavior, that is also therapeutic in itself.
Well, what we know about addictive behavior is there's withdrawal. So what kind of symptoms did your patient experience, and would you consider that typical?
Depressive symptoms, anxiety, frustration, arguing a lot, and also craving. Craving is a huge one. And like I said, he shared that his craving for the device was greater than his craving for alcohol, which was actually an eye-opener for us.
Do you think that internet addiction could really just be maybe a sign of something else, like perhaps obsessive compulsive behavior, but instead of washing hands, you're tapping your Google Glass all the time?
That's a great question. And the research shows that addictive behaviors often co-occur with mental disorders and also co-occur with other addictions. So when you have somebody who abuses alcohol, who is also OCD, do you say they're OCD because they're using alcohol too much? No, you say they're OCD with alcohol problem or maybe alcoholism. So it took 30 to 40 years for alcoholism to be an entity by itself. I think internet addiction disorder, as we understand this with more research, it's going to evolve into its own diagnoses.
Are you doing more research on there? Are sort of the mental health community and addiction people, are they focusing on this now?
Absolutely, and that's why the Navy has me working on this problem, because we want to increase force readiness and we want to improve the lives of our service members. And so we don't want people to be stuck in addictive behaviors that now jeopardize their work performance as well as their ability to feel healthy. And so that's why we're doing this research.
What other kind of addictions do you think could maybe come about or emerge as our technology keeps growing?
You know, I think pornography is going to be a huge one. Pornography is very stimulating, and we're now having problems people coming in with erectile dysfunction because of pornography overuse, and also internet gaming disorder. We're having people coming in with problems because they're playing games 30 to 60 hours a day, 30 to 60 hours a week on top of their full-time job. So it's causing sleep deprivation, anxiety, lack of focus, and poor work performance.
Well, very interesting. I'm sure we'll be talking to you more about this in the future. Dr. Andrew Doan, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.